My name is Amira, and I need to tell you a story that defies logic. It is a story about the day I stopped breathing. I was 34 years old on March 15th, 2019. That was the date my heart stopped beating for 8 full minutes. I was clinically dead, lying in a pool of my own blood after a bullet tore through my chest. But the physical death is the least interesting part of this story. What happened when my eyes closed is what matters. What I experienced on the other side didn't just change my theology. It shattered every single thing I believed about God, about faith, and about eternity itself. To understand the shock of what I saw, you first need to understand who I was. I wasn't just a casual believer or someone who attended services on holidays. I was born into a devout Muslim family, in a tight-knit community where faith was oxygen. It wasn't something you believed in, it was something you were. It was written in your DNA, woven into the fabric of your daily existence. My earliest memories are not of toys or playgrounds. They are filled with the haunting, beautiful sound of the adhan. The call to prayer would echo through our neighborhood 5 times a day. It was the rhythm of our lives, marking the passing of time more reliably than any clock. I can still close my eyes and smell the specific scent of my father's prayer rug. It smelled of musk, old wool, and a hint of rosewater incense. My father was a man of immense discipline and quiet strength. He would take me to the mosque when I was barely old enough to walk. I remember watching from the women's section, peering through the partition. I saw the rows of men bowing in perfect unison, like a wave crashing against the shore. The smell of incense mixed with the scent of hundreds of old carpet. It was a heavy, ancient smell that made you feel small and reverent. The melodic recitation of the Quran would fill the air, vibrating in my chest. Even as a child, I knew this was serious business. This wasn't a game, this was submission to the creator of the universe. I learned Arabic specifically to read the Quran properly, as it was revealed. I spent countless hours as a young girl, sitting on the floor with my legs crossed. I would trace the elegant, swirling script with my small finger. I memorized verses I didn't fully understand, but I trusted them completely. The Arabic words felt holy in my mouth, heavy with centuries of tradition. My teachers told me that the Quran was the direct speech of Allah. To mispronounce a word was to show disrespect to the divine. So I practiced until my throat was dry and my tongue was precise. My faith wasn't a weekend hobby. It was the rhythm of my entire existence, the heartbeat of my days. Every morning, long before the sun dared to peek over the horizon, I would wake. The house would be silent, the world outside still asleep in the darkness. But I would rise for the Fajr prayer, the first duty of the day. I performed the ritual washing called wudu, cleaning my hands, mouth, face, and feet. I remember the shock of the cold water splashing on my face in the pre-dawn chill. It was a physical reminder to wake up, to be alert, to be clean before God. I would stand on my prayer mat, facing the direction of Mecca. 5 times a day, every single day without exception. I would prostrate myself, pressing my forehead into the rough weave of the rug. My hijab was always carefully pinned, framing my face perfectly. My body was covered modestly, every curve hidden as required by the law. There was a profound comfort in the predictability of it all. The structure gave me a sense of safety in a chaotic world. I knew exactly what to say, exactly how to move, exactly when to bow. It was a choreographed dance of devotion that connected me to billions of others. There was a certainty that I was on the right path, the straight path. Ramadan was the highlight of my spiritual year, a sacred season I longed for. For 30 days each year, I would fast from the moment of sunrise to sunset. Not a drop of water, not a morsel of food would pass my lips. My throat would burn with thirst in the afternoon heat, but I felt proud. This suffering was my offering, a proof of my discipline and my loyalty. I remember the Taraweeh prayers every night, standing for hours until my legs ached. The special recitations of the Quran that seemed to float in the night air. There was a spiritual high during Laylat al-Qadr, the night of power. We believed that on this night, the Quran was first revealed to the Prophet. The air felt charged with electricity, as if angels were walking among us. Then there were the iftar meals, the glorious breaking of the fast. I can taste the sweetness of the dates we ate to break our hunger. I can hear the laughter of family and friends gathering from the mosque. The joy of Eid celebrations, marking the end of the holy month, was explosive. New clothes, gifts, feasts, and the feeling of a community united in victory. These weren't just traditions to me, they were the very heartbeat of my life. I loved the discipline, I loved the sense of belonging. I loved the feeling that I was part of something ancient and unshakable. My identity as a Muslim woman wasn't separate from my identity as a person. It was everything I was. It was the lens through which I saw the world, the filter for every thought. I was taught about other religions, of course, but always with a sense of pity. I was taught that Isa, the man Christians called Jesus, was a prophet. He was a respected messenger of God, a great teacher, yes. But he was nothing more than a man, created from dust like Adam. The idea that he was the son of God was repulsive to my mind. It was called shirk, the unforgivable sin of associating partners with Allah. Islam was crystal clear, diamond hard on this specific point. God has no son, God cannot have a son, God does not beget, nor is he begotten. To suggest otherwise was illogical, even blasphemous. How could the creator of the universe have a child? It made no sense. The Quran taught that Jesus wasn't even crucified. It said that God saved him, that someone else died in his place. We believed that Christians had been deceived for 2,000 years. I pitied them honestly, with a kind of arrogant compassion. They seemed like nice people, good neighbors, but they were lost. They had corrupted the truth, turning a prophet into an idol. I never hated them, but I knew with absolute certainty that they were wrong. My understanding of salvation was simple, mathematical, and terrifyingly heavy. I pictured Judgment Day as a massive courtroom with a giant set of scales. On that final day, my deeds would be weighed in front of all creation. Good deeds on the right side, bad deeds on the left side. The 5 pillars of Islam were the weights I placed on the right side. The declaration of faith, the daily prayers, the charity given to the poor. The fasting during Ramadan, the pilgrimage to Mecca I hope to make someday. I performed these duties faithfully, obsessively. I collected good deeds like a miser collecting gold coins. I was building a fortress of righteousness, brick by brick. But here is the secret I never told anyone, not even my mother. Here is the darkness that lived in the corner of my devout heart. I was never, ever certain it was enough. I hoped Allah would find me worthy of Jannah, of paradise. But hope is a flimsy thing when you are standing on the edge of eternity. I never knew for sure, how could I? The scale might tip either way at the very last second. One bad thought, one moment of pride, one unrepented sin could ruin it all. So I kept striving, I kept working, I kept pushing myself harder. I tried to be good enough, pure enough, modest enough. My relationship with Allah was one of deep reverence and total submission. Islam literally means submission, and I submitted with every fiber of my being. I served Allah dutifully, like a loyal soldier serving a general. But in the quiet of the night, a dangerous question would float into my mind. Did I know him? Could anyone really know him in an intimate, personal way? He felt distant, transcendent, completely unknowable. He was the master of the universe, far above my petty concerns. I prayed in Arabic, often reciting words I didn't fully grasp. I followed the prescribed movements, the bowing, the prostrating. But was my heart connecting, or was I just fulfilling an obligation? There was fear mixed with my devotion, a cold current running beneath the surface. It was a constant awareness that I might not measure up. As a Muslim woman, my faith was also tightly tied to my modesty and honor. I wore my hijab proudly, seeing it as a crown of obedience. It was my protection, my barrier against the corruption of the world. I was careful about my interactions with men, maintaining strict boundaries. I lowered my gaze, I guarded my voice, I protected my reputation. I helped my mother prepare meals for the community, chopping vegetables for hours. I served tea at women's gatherings at the mosque, smiling politely. I taught younger girls how to pray properly, correcting their posture. I was the model daughter, the perfect example. But inside, I was a woman walking on a tightrope over a canyon. I was doing everything right, but I felt a hollowness I couldn't name. I pushed that feeling down, burying it under more prayers and more fasting. I told myself that this was just the test of faith. I told myself that certainty would come if I just tried harder. I had no idea that my striving was about to come to a violent end. I had no idea that the scale I was so afraid of didn't even exist. I had no idea that the God I was trying to impress was about to crash into my world. And it all started on a morning that looked exactly like any other. I lived my life with two invisible companions, or so I was taught. According to tradition, there is an angel on the right shoulder and an angel on the left. The one on the right records your good deeds, scratching them into an eternal book. The one on the left records your sins, your failures, your slip-ups. I became obsessed with these invisible scribes. I imagined the scratching sound of their pens with every word I spoke. If I snapped at my younger sister, I would physically cringe. I could almost feel the weight of the ink settling on the left side of the ledger. So I would immediately rush to do something good to cancel it out. I would recite a surah, give money to a beggar, or force a smile I didn't feel. My life became a frantic mathematical equation that I was trying to solve in my head. +1 for charity, -1 for anger, +2 for extra prayers. I was a spiritual accountant, constantly tallying a balance sheet that I was never allowed to see. This is what I meant when I said the scale was heavy. It wasn't just a theological concept for the afterlife, it was a daily crushing burden. I remember one specific night during Ramadan that haunts me to this day. It was the 27th night, considered the holiest of all nights. The house was finally quiet after the chaos of the breaking of the fast. My stomach was full, but my spirit felt hollow, like a drum beaten by an empty rhythm. I was sitting by the window, looking out at the moon hanging low over the rooftops. I had fasted perfectly, I had prayed the Taraweeh, I had read the Quran for hours. My throat was sore from recitation, and my knees ached from standing. By all accounts, I was a righteous woman. But as I looked at that moon, a terrifying thought whispered from the darkness. Is this it? Is this all there is to knowing God? I felt like I was throwing pebbles into a vast, dark ocean, hopping one would make a sound. But there was no splash, no ripple, only the silence of the night. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window and wept. I wasn't crying because of sin, I was crying because of starvation. Not the hunger for food, I could handle that. It was a starvation of the soul, a desperate craving for a father, not just a judge. I wanted to be held, not just evaluated. I wanted to be loved, not just graded on a curve. But I quickly wiped the tears away, terrified that even my doubts were being recorded. I washed my face, performed wudu again, and went back to my prayer rug. I scrubbed my arms during the washing until the skin was red and raw. I was trying to wash away the doubt with water, but doubt is waterproof. It lives deep in the marrow, where ritual cannot reach. I prostrated myself again, whispering, Allah is the greatest, over and over. I was trying to convince myself as much as I was praising him. I told myself that this distance was respectful. That God is too holy to be close, too majestic to be intimate. To expect intimacy was arrogance, I told myself. Who was I, a speck of dust, to want to know the creator of the galaxies? So I doubled down on my discipline. If I couldn't feel his love, I would at least earn his approval. I became stricter with myself and sadly stricter with others. I started judging women who wore their hijabs too loosely. I looked down on those who listened to music or wore makeup. My insecurity masked itself as superiority. It is a common disguise for the religiously terrified. I built a wall of rules around my heart, to keep the questions out. And at the center of that wall was my rejection of anything Christian. We were taught that their path was not just wrong, but insulting to God. And nothing was more insulting than their claim about Jesus. It was the one line we could never cross, the blasphemy that had no cure. I had no idea that the very thing I was running from was the only thing that could save me. I had no idea that the prophet I respected from a distance was about to walk right through my wall. The scale I was so desperate to balance was about to be shattered. But first, I had to confront the man named Issa. The name Issa was familiar to me, but it was like knowing a distant relative you've never met. We respected him, we honored him, we even named our sons after him. But there was a strict fence built around his identity, a boundary line painted in blood. He was a prophet, we said, a mighty messenger, a breath of God. But that was where the sentence ended. Any attempt to add a comma to add Son of God was spiritual suicide. I remember walking past a small church on my way to university one afternoon. It was an old stone building with a wooden cross mounted on the roof. I stopped for a moment, staring up at those two crossed beams of wood. A strange mixture of feelings swirled in my chest: fear, pity, and a cold sense of superiority. I looked at the cross and thought, how tragic. How tragic that millions of people worship an instrument of torture. How tragic that they believe God could be humiliated like that. To me, the idea of God dying was the ultimate weakness. God is all-powerful, almighty, the King of Kings. Why would a king let his subjects spit on him? Why would he let them nail him to wood? It didn't make sense, it wasn't dignified, it wasn't divine. In my mind, God's power was shown by crushing his enemies, not by dying for them. I saw a woman walking out of the church doors that day. She was older, wearing a simple coat, clutching a Bible to her chest. She looked peaceful, which confused me. How could she have peace when her theology was so broken? I wanted to walk up to her and shake her gently. Don't you see, I wanted to say, God is too great to have a son, it's impossible. Jesus was saved from the cross, I would have told her. Allah raised him up. He didn't suffer, he didn't die. You are crying over a death that never happened. I felt a surge of pride in my own, pure monotheism. I had the truth, she had a fairy tale. I walked away from that church feeling safer in my own skin. I wrapped my hijab tighter, comforted by the logic of Islam. God is one, he has no partners, he has no needs. It was clean, it was simple, it was mathematically perfect. But there was a tiny splinter in my mind that I couldn't remove. If Isa was just a prophet, why did he have so much power in the Quran? He healed the blind, he raised the dead, he created birds from clay. Even in our own holy book he seemed different. I pushed the thought away instantly. Shaitan whispers, I told myself, don't listen. Asking questions about Jesus was dangerous. It was the first step on a slippery slope that led straight to hellfire. So I stayed on my side of the fence, safe and secure. I ignored the cross, I ignored the Bible, I ignored the nagging curiosity. I focused on my prayers, my fasting, my Arabic. I was a good Muslim woman, and good Muslim women don't wonder about the Son of God. But life has a way of mocking our certainties. Or perhaps God has a sense of humor. Because the very thing I rejected, the weakness, the suffering, the death, was about to become my only hope. The tragic cross I looked down upon was about to become my lifeline. I just didn't know it yet. I was too busy being right to realize I was dying of thirst. I was too busy defending God's honor to notice I didn't have his heart. I continued my routine, ticking boxes, counting deeds, avoiding the Christian era. Until the calendar turned to March 15th, 2019. The day the fence I had built would be blown apart by a bullet. The day my theology would collide with reality. And the day I would learn that being right is nothing compared to being loved. It started so quietly. The morning arrived with the gentle promise of spring, oblivious to the violence waiting in the wings. March 15th, 2019 began with a deception. It promised to be ordinary, a carbon copy of 1,000 days before it. The sky was that crisp, impossible blue that makes you glad to be alive. There wasn't a cloud in sight, just a vast open canvas of peace. I remember waking up to the smell of burnt toast and cardamom. My mother was already in the kitchen, the heart of our home, making breakfast. She was humming a tune I had heard her sing since I was in the cradle. The sunlight was streaming through the kitchen window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. It felt idyllic, almost cinematic in its perfection. I walked in and kissed her cheek, tasting the salt of her skin and the flour on her face. "You're up early," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes were warm, crinkling at the corners with that fierce, quiet maternal love. "I have errands to run," I told her, stealing a piece of warm flatbread. "I want to go to the shopping center before the Friday crowds get too crazy." She stopped me for a second, her hand reaching out to adjust my hijab. She tucked a stray lock of hair back under the fabric, smoothing it down. "You look beautiful, Amira," she whispered, patting my shoulder. "But you look tired. Rest when you get back. I'll make tea." "I promise," I said, laughing. I promised her tea at 4 o'clock. I had no way of knowing that by 4 o'clock, my blood would be on a stretcher. I had no way of knowing that was the last time her hands would touch me with approval. Before I left the house, I went to my room to pray. It was habit, muscle memory, a spiritual reflex. I laid out my prayer mat, facing the Qibla, the direction of the Kaaba. I raised my hands to my ears and whispered, "Allahu Akbar. God is the greatest." I recited the Al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran. "Guide us to the straight path," I prayed. "The path of those upon whom you have bestowed favor, not of those who have evoked your anger or of those who are astray." I said those words with total, absolute sincerity. I was begging for the straight path, assuming I was already standing on it. I had no idea that in less than 3 hours, the path would take a sharp turn off a cliff. I bowed, I prostrated, I touched my forehead to the ground. I felt the friction of the rug against my skin. If I had known this was my final prayer as a Muslim, would I have stayed there longer? Would I have screamed? Would I have refused to get up? But we live our lives in a blessed ignorance of the future. I finished my prayer, turning my head to the right and left. "Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah," I whispered. "Peace and mercy of God be upon you." I folded the prayer mat, rolling it up tightly and placing it in the corner. I didn't realize I was folding up my entire history. I checked my reflection in the mirror one last time. My dress was long and modest, my scarf was secure, my conscience was clear. I grabbed my purse and my car keys. "I'll be back soon," I shouted down the hallway to my father. "Drive safely," his voice boomed from the living room. I walked out the front door into the bright, blinding sunshine. The air smelled of spring and exhaust fumes. I got into my car, turned on the radio, and drove toward the city center. I was thinking about groceries, I was thinking about dinner. I was thinking about everything except death. Death is a thief that doesn't make an appointment. It was waiting for me at the shopping center, hiding in the ordinary afternoon. The shopping center was a cathedral of noise and light. I remember the swoosh of the automatic doors sliding open. A blast of conditioned air hit my face, smelling of cinnamon rolls and expensive perfume. It was the smell of commerce, the scent of 100 different lives intersecting. I checked my mental list: milk, bread, lentils for the soup. Mundane things, boring things, life-sustaining things. I walked past a group of teenagers laughing near the fountain. Their joy was loud and unfiltered, echoing off the high glass ceilings. I saw a young mother struggling with a stroller and a crying toddler. I smiled at her sympathetically, a silent sisterhood of patience. Everything was woven together in a tapestry of perfect normalcy. People were rushing, talking on phones, arguing, kissing. I stopped at a produce stand outside the main grocery entrance. I was picking up an orange, feeling its rough, waxy skin in my hand. I was debating whether it was ripe enough. That was the biggest problem in my life at that exact second, the ripeness of an orange. Then the world broke. It started with a sound that didn't belong. Bub, bub, bub. It was sharp, dry, and rhythmic. My brain, desperate to maintain order, refused to classify it as danger. Fireworks I thought annoyed inside the mall. Maybe a car backfiring in the parking garage. I looked around, expecting to see a prankster or a mechanic. I saw the confusion ripple through the crowd like a wave in water. Everyone froze for a microsecond, a collective holding of breath. Then came the scream. It wasn't a scream of surprise, it was a primal, animalistic shriek of terror. It tore through the cinnamon-scented air and shattered the illusion of safety. People started running. Not the organized jogging of a fire drill, but the chaotic scattering of prey. Bags were dropped, children were snatched up, bodies collided. Panic is contagious, it spreads faster than any virus. I stood there frozen, the orange still in my hand. Why couldn't I move? My mind was screaming run, but my legs were heavy as lead. Then I saw him. He wasn't a monster with fangs, he was a man. Just a man walking with a terrifying, calm purpose. He was dressed in dark clothing, holding something long and black metal. The weapon looked absurdly large, like a toy that had grown up wrong. He wasn't running, he was hunting. He turned toward the crowd near the fountain, and I saw the muzzle flash. It wasn't like the movies, it was louder, uglier, more violent. Time did something strange then. It didn't just slow down, it dissolved. I could see individual droplets of water from the fountain suspended in the air. I could see the terror etched into the face of a man falling backward. I dropped the orange. I watched it roll across the polished white tiles, a bright spot of color in the gray fear. My survival instinct finally kicked my brain into gear. Move, Amira, move now. I turned to run toward the exit, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wasn't thinking about theology, I wasn't thinking about heaven or hell. I was thinking about the door. Just the door. I took one step, then two. I was so close to the corner, so close to cover. But the air behind me ripped open with a thunderclap. And the world suddenly tilted sideways. The impact didn't feel like pain at first. It felt like being punched in the back by a giant, invisible fist. There was a massive shove that lifted me off my feet and threw me forward. I remember the confusion more than the agony. Why am I falling? I wondered. My knees hit the hard tile floor, and the breath was knocked out of me. Then came the heat. It started in my chest, a searing white-hot poker branding me from the inside out. It wasn't a burn on the skin, it was a fire deep in the engine room of my body. I tried to inhale, but my lungs refused to cooperate. It felt like I was breathing through a straw that was slowly being pinched shut. I rolled onto my back, instinctively bringing my hand to my chest. When I pulled it away, it was covered in bright crimson wetness. The color was shocking, it was too red, too real. That's my blood, my brain stated, detached and clinical. That is a lot of blood. The numbness began to spread outward from the wound, a cold creeping frost. My fingers started to tingle, then went silent. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy logs attached to my hips. I stared up at the ceiling of the shopping center. It was vaulted glass, showing the same perfect blue sky I had admired earlier. Clouds were drifting lazily, indifferent to the massacre below. How could the sky be so peaceful when I was broken? The sounds of the chaos began to fade, as if someone was turning down the volume dial. The screaming became distant, muffled, like listening to a radio in another room. Faces appeared above me, blocking out the indifferent sky. Strangers. A woman with terrified eyes, a man shouting into a phone. Their lips were moving, but the words were garbled. Stay, help coming. Someone pressed their hands hard onto my chest. The pain flared up for a second, sharp, biting, and then vanished into the numbness. They were trying to keep the blood inside, but it was a losing battle. I could feel life leaking out of me, warm and sticky, pooling beneath my back. My hijab had come loose, slipping off my head to reveal my hair. In any other moment, I would have been mortified, I would have snatched it back. But modesty doesn't matter when you are bleeding out. My vision began to tunnel. The edges of the world turned black, eating away at the light. The tunnel was shrinking, turning the wide world into a small, bright circle. My thoughts, which had been racing, suddenly slowed to a crawl. I thought of my mother's tea, waiting for me at 4 o'clock. I'm going to be late, I thought stupidly. Then a deeper, ancient instinct took over. I needed to say the Shahada. It is the duty of every Muslim to die with the name of God on their lips. I tried to force my mouth to move, but my jaw felt like concrete. La ilaha, I tried to whisper, there is no God. Gila ale but ale. I don't know if the sound came out, but the intention was there. I was trying to stamp my passport for eternity at the very last second. But as the darkness closed in, choking out the final sliver of light, panic set in. It wasn't the panic of pain, it was the panic of the soul. The question I had spent 34 years running from stood over me like a grim reaper. Is it enough? The scale, the damn scale. I saw it in my mind's eye, tipping back and forth unsteady. Did I pray enough? Did I fast enough? Was my heart pure? I realized with terrifying clarity that I didn't know. I was stepping off a cliff into total darkness, hoping there was a net, but fearing there was only gravity. Am I ready? I screamed silently. Please, God, let it be enough. Then the circle of light snapped shut. The world blinked out. No sound, no pain, no breath. Just an abrupt, terrifying nothingness. I was gone. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the presence of peace. A moment ago, my world had been screaming sirens, shouting voices, and thundering heartbeats. Now it was absolute pristine stillness. And the pain, the fire in my chest, the suffocating pressure was simply gone. It vanished instantly, like a candle blown out in a hurricane. I took a breath, or I thought I did. But air didn't rush into lungs, existence rushed into my spirit. I felt a sensation that is hard to describe in human language. It was a pop, a sudden release of tension, like a cork pulling free from a bottle. I felt light, impossibly, wonderfully light. I wasn't falling anymore, I was rising. I looked down, expecting to see the darkness of unconsciousness. Instead, I saw the shopping center floor from 10 feet in the air. I saw the chaotic swirl of people below me. I saw the paramedics rushing in with their orange bags and frantic energy. And I saw a woman lying in a pool of blood. Her dress was soaked crimson, her face pale and slack. Her hijab lay on the dirty tiles, forgotten and trampled. It took me a full second to realize the impossible truth. That woman was me. I was staring at my own corpse. It was the most disorienting moment of my existence. If that is me, I thought, then who is this observing? I looked at my body with a strange, cool detachment. It looked like a discarded costume, an empty shell that I no longer needed. I felt no attachment to it, no sorrow for it. It was just biological matter breaking down. I watched a paramedic rip open my dress to attach defibrillator pads. In life, I would have died of shame to be exposed like that in public. But from up here, modesty seemed like such a trivial, earthly concept. They were pumping my chest, trying to force the heart to beat again. Clear, someone shouted. I saw my body jerk violently with the shock. Stop it, I wanted to tell them, I'm not in there anymore. I'm fine, I'm actually better than fine. I tried to shout to them to reassure them. I'm up here, don't worry. But my voice had no sound waves, it had no frequency they could hear. I was on a different channel of reality entirely. I looked at the crowd and saw faces twisted in horror and pity. I wanted to comfort them. Don't cry for the shell, I thought, the pearl is free. The realization hit me with the force of a revelation. I was not my brain, I was not my body. My brain was down there, dying of oxygen deprivation, shutting down synapse by synapse. But my consciousness, my eye was more awake, more vivid, more sharp than ever. I was thinking clearly, without a physical organ to think with. I was seeing without retinas, I was hearing without eardrums. I had spent my whole life believing I was asterisk a body that had asterisk a soul. I was wrong. I am a soul that briefly lived in a body. And now the lease was up. The tether that held me to the earth was cut. I began to drift higher, passing through the ceiling of the shopping center. The steel and glass offered no resistance. I passed through them like smoke. I saw the city spread out below me, a grid of traffic and life. But it was fading, losing its color, losing its importance. The pull of the earth was gone. A new gravity was taking hold of me, pulling me elsewhere. I found myself floating in a vast, expansive darkness. But do not misunderstand me, this was not a scary darkness. It wasn't the darkness of a dungeon or a grave. It was the darkness of velvet, of a warm womb of deep space. It felt like suspension, a holy pause between two worlds. I wasn't afraid. Ask yourself, have you ever felt completely out of control, yet perfectly safe? That is what this felt like. I was being held by the void, cradled in a silence so deep it felt like a blanket. Time stopped making any sense here. Was I there for seconds, minutes, 1,000 years? There was no sun to mark the day, no pulse to mark the second. It was the eternal now. In this space, I began to shed my earthly layers like old clothes. The pain of the bullet wound was a distant memory, irrelevant. The fear of dying was gone because I had already done it. Even the thoughts of my family, my mother's grief, my father's expectations began to fade. They didn't disappear, but they moved to the background. My identity as Amira, the Muslim woman, began to unravel. The labels I had worn for 34 years, daughter, sister, citizen, felt heavy and unnecessary. Here in the dark I was just a me. Naked spirit, raw consciousness. Then the movement began. I didn't swim and I didn't fly. I was pulled. It felt like a magnetic force was drawing me forward, gentle but irresistible. I entered what people often call the tunnel, but that word is too small. It was a transition, a wormhole through the fabric of reality. The darkness began to swirl, and I felt a sense of velocity without wind. I was moving up, or perhaps in, direction has no meaning there. As I moved, memories began to flash through my mind, but not like a movie. They were flashes of emotion and intent. I saw myself as a child learning to pray. I felt the sincerity of my heart back then, before the rules hardened me. I saw the moments of joy, the moments of sorrow. But strangely, the religious moments, the rituals, the fasting felt hollow here. They didn't carry the weight I thought they would. They felt like husks, empty shells of duty. What stood out were the moments of connection. A smile shared with a stranger, the love I felt for my sister. The anxiety about the scale rose up for a brief second. Where is the judgment, I wondered? Where are the angels with the books? But the darkness offered no courtroom. Only this irresistible pull toward something ahead. I realized I was not moving into the unknown. I was moving toward a presence. Something or someone was calling me. It wasn't a voice in my ear, it was a vibration in my soul. It was a summons I couldn't refuse and didn't want to. Deep in the distance, a pinpoint of light appeared. It was small at first, like a diamond on black velvet. But it was growing brighter, larger, pulsating with life. And with the light came a feeling that made me want to weep with relief. Home. It felt like coming home after a long, cold journey. It felt like the answer to a question I had been asking my entire life. I let go of the last of my resistance. I surrendered to the pull. I raced toward the light, leaving the shadow of the earth behind. I was ready to see what lay at the end of the tunnel. The light ahead of me wasn't like any light on earth. It didn't have a source like a bulb or a sun, it simply was asterisk. At first it was like a star, a single piercing note of brilliance. But as I drew nearer, or as it drew me in, It expanded until it filled everything. It was brighter than a million suns put together. By all laws of physics, I should have been blinded. My eyes should have burned out of my sockets from the intensity. But this light didn't hurt, it healed. It was soft and brilliant at the same time, a paradox of glory. Colors began to bleed into my vision, colors that have no name in our dictionary. Imagine a color that is deeper than blue and more alive than gold. Imagine a color that tastes like music and feels like joy. That is what I was seeing. The light wasn't static energy, it was alive. It breathed, it pulsed, it had an atmosphere. As I entered the outer edges of this radiance, I felt a wave hit me. It wasn't a wave of heat, though it was warm. It was a wave of pure, concentrated emotion. Love. But not the human kind of love. Not the "I love you because you are my daughter" love. Not the "I love you because you are beautiful" love. This was liquid love, absolute and unconditional. It washed over me, penetrating every layer of my being. It soaked into the parts of me that were scared, the parts that were ashamed. It found the little girl who tried to be perfect and told her she could rest. For 34 years, I had believed that God's love was a prize to be won. I thought it was a salary paid at the end of a long week of hard work. If I prayed enough, He might love me. If I fasted enough, He might accept me. But this had no conditions. It didn't ask for my resume of good deeds. It didn't ask to see my hijab or check my prayer log. It just loved me ferociously, completely. I felt more loved in that single second than I had in my entire lifetime combined. Every fear I had ever carried dissolved instantly in that atmosphere. Guilt evaporated like mist in the morning sun. The inadequacy that had haunted me, the feeling of never being enough, was gone. I was enough simply because I existed in this light. I realized with a shock that the light knew I was there. This wasn't just an energy field, it was a consciousness. It was aware of me, it was waiting for me. It was intelligent, ancient, and terrifyingly personal. I was moving toward the center of the brilliance, and my heart was pounding with anticipation. I wasn't trembling with fear of judgment anymore. I was trembling with the thrill of a reunion. I felt like an orphan who had forgotten she had a father. And now, finally, I was walking through the front door. Within the blinding center of the light, a form began to take shape. It started as a silhouette, standing tall and majestic. It was human in shape, but transcendent in nature. The figure was made of light, yet somehow solid, more real than the floor I had died on. He was approaching me, or perhaps I was being drawn to him. The distance between us closed, and the brilliance softened just enough for me to see. I saw a face. I cannot fully describe it because human words are too small, too limited. It was a face that looked like it had seen the birth of the stars. It was rugged and masculine, yet radiant with a beauty that broke my heart. He had hair that fell to his shoulders, and a beard that framed a strong jaw. His eyes. They were pools of living fire, penetrating right through me. They saw everything I had ever done. Every secret sin, every hidden thought, every moment of pride. I stood naked before him, spiritually exposed. But there was no condemnation in those eyes. There was no anger, no disappointment. Only knowing, only deep, unfathomable compassion. And then the recognition hit me like a lightning bolt. I knew him. My spirit recognized him instantly, faster than my brain could process. It was a knowledge that bypassed my intellect and rang true in my soul. This was Jesus. The name rose up in my consciousness, not spoken but known. And immediately my mind revolted. No, I thought, panic flaring up, this can't be right. I am a Muslim woman, I submitted to Allah, I followed the straight path. Why am I seeing Jesus? Why not Muhammad? Why not an angel? My theology was screaming in protest. Everything I had been taught for 34 years rushed to the defense. Jesus is just a prophet, my mind shouted. He is not God. This is a trick. This is Satan trying to deceive me in my final moment. I tried to look away, to reject the vision. But I couldn't deny the love pouring off of him. Could a lie feel this true? Could a deception be this holy? Shaitan is the father of lies, the author of fear. But there was no fear here, only a peace that surpassed all understanding. Every fiber of my being was vibrating with the truth of who he was. My soul was crying out, Lord, even while my mind was crying out, Prophet. He looked at me with a smile that radiated both joy and sorrow simultaneously. It was as if he carried the weight of the world's pain, yet held the lightness of eternal hope. He looked like he had been waiting for me specifically. Like this meeting had been on his calendar since before the foundations of the world. He wasn't surprised to see me. He wasn't checking a list to see if I belonged. He looked at me like a father looks at a lost child who has finally stumbled home. My theology began to crumble under the weight of his presence. Arguments don't stand a chance against reality. You can argue that the sun doesn't exist when you are in a cave. But when you step outside at noon, the argument is over. I was stepping into the noon of eternity. And the sun was standing right in front of me. He spoke, but his voice didn't vibrate through the air like a human voice. It resonated through my entire being, vibrating in the marrow of my spirit. It was like thunder and a whisper combined into one sound. It bypassed my ears entirely and settled directly into my consciousness. The first word he said was my name. Amira. He didn't say it in Arabic or English or any earthly tongue. He spoke it in the language of the soul, a language I had never learned but understood perfectly. The way he said my name carried the weight of my entire history. It sounded like he had been speaking it since before the stars were born. Like he had called me into existence with that very syllable. I have always known you, he said. The words dropped into my heart like heavy stones into a still pond. Ripples of understanding spread out, touching every memory I had. Suddenly, my life began to play out before us, suspended in the light. But it wasn't the Judgment Day courtroom I had feared for so long. There was no scale, there were no angry angels, there was no ledger of sins. Instead, he showed me the moments where I had sought him. I saw myself as a 7-year-old girl, tracing the Quranic script with my finger. I saw your sincerity, he whispered, his voice thick with affection. You were looking for me, Amira, even when you didn't know my name. I saw the nights I spent weeping on my prayer rug, feeling empty and alone. In my memory, that room was empty. But in this vision, I saw him sitting right beside me. I was there, he said gently. I was close to the broken-hearted. When you cried out to a distant God, I was the one catching your tears. I saw the moment, I looked at the cross on the church and felt pity. I cringed, feeling the shame of my own arrogance. But he didn't scold me, he just smiled with a sad tenderness. You were trying to protect God's honor, he said. I know your heart. But you didn't understand that my honor is found in my humility. He showed me the Christian woman I had judged, the one with the Bible. I was reaching out to you through her, he revealed. I was knocking on the door of your heart, using every crack I could find. I realized with a jolt that he hadn't been hiding from me. I had been hiding from him, behind a fortress of rules and rituals. He hadn't been a distant deity, sitting on a throne in the seventh heaven. He had been Emmanuel, God with us, stalking me with his love my entire life. I felt a sob rise up in my spirit, a release of decades of loneliness. I thought I had to earn you, I whispered to him. I thought I had to be perfect. He shook his head slowly. You cannot earn what is already given. I don't want your performance, Amira, I want you. The intimacy was overwhelming. In Islam, I was a servant, a slave of Allah. Here I was a daughter, I was a beloved, I was wanted. But my mind still wrestled with the greatest barrier of all. The cross, the crucifixion, the death of God. It went against everything I was wired to believe. And as if he heard my silent struggle, he moved his hands. He extended his arms toward me, palms facing upward. And there in the midst of his radiant, glorious light were the scars. They were not symbolic, they were not artistic metaphors. They were real, rugged, brutal holes in his flesh. I stared at them, my breath catching in a throat I no longer had. I could see where the iron nails had ripped through the muscle and tendon. I could see the jagged edges of the skin where the metal had crushed the bone. These were the marks of violence, the evidence of an execution. They should have been hideous, they should have belonged to a corpse. But on him they were badges of honor, shining brighter than the rest of him. Look, he said softly, look at the evidence. My Islamic theology screamed in protest one last time. But the Quran says you didn't die, my mind insisted. It says it only appeared so. It says God saved you from such humiliation. He looked deep into my eyes, silencing my confusion with his truth. I was crucified, Amira, I did die. No one took my place, no one tricked the world. I laid down my life willingly, I chose the nails. He opened his robe slightly to show me his side. I saw the large scarred gash where the Roman spear had pierced him. It was wide enough to put a hand through. It was a wound that aimed straight for the heart. Why, I asked, the question tearing out of my soul. Why would God allow this? Why would you let them hurt you? Because love always chooses sacrifice, he answered. If I am just a prophet who lived a good life, I save no one. A prophet's death is a tragedy, but God's death is a ransom. I took the penalty that was meant for you. The words hit me like a physical blow, for me. He didn't just die for the world in a general, abstract sense. He died for Amira. He died for the Muslim woman who denied his divinity for 34 years. He died for the girl who thought she could save herself with prayer, rugs, and fasting. I took the weight, he said, the weight of the scale you feared. I took the judgment, I took the separation. I endured the darkness so you could stand in this light. I looked at those scars, and suddenly, the humiliation of the cross vanished. It wasn't weakness, it was power. It was the greatest display of strength in the history of the universe. To have the power to stop it, but the love to endure it. My pride shattered into a million pieces. I had spent my life trying to be good enough for God. And here stood God, with holes in his hands, telling me he died because I couldn't be. He had done the work I was trying to do. He had paid the debt I was trying to pay off with pennies. I fell to my knees, or the spiritual equivalent of them. I couldn't stand in the face of such sacrificial love. I believe, I whispered, you are not just a prophet. You are the Lord, you are the Lamb. The shirk was gone, the blasphemy was the truth. And in that moment of surrender, the last chain of my old religion fell off. I was free. Then he addressed the shadow that had darkened my entire existence. He spoke to the fear that had made me a prisoner of my own religion. You have spent your life trembling before a scale, he said. You have counted your prayers like coins, hoping to buy your way into heaven. I nodded, unable to speak, shame burning in my chest. I had treated God like a vending machine. Insert good deeds, get out salvation. There is no scale, Jesus said, and the words were like a hammer shattering glass. Not for those who are in me. Amira, salvation is not a wage you earn at the end of a workday. It is a gift you receive at the beginning of the relationship. My mind reeled, a gift. In my culture, nothing was free, everything had a price, honor had a price. If you could earn it, he continued, then my death was unnecessary. If you could save yourself by fasting and praying, why did I have to bleed? You cannot work your way up to God. That is why God came down to you. He showed me the futility of my spiritual mathematics. My good deeds, which I thought were gold, looked like dirty rags in his light. Not because they were bad actions, but because the motive was fear, not love. I was an employee trying to impress a boss, not a daughter loving a father. When I said it is finished on the cross, I meant it, he declared. The work of salvation is complete, the debt is paid in full. You cannot add to it, you cannot improve upon perfection. You can only receive it with empty hands. I felt a physical sensation of weight lifting off my shoulders. It was a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying until it was gone. The weight of 34 years of striving. The crushing pressure to be perfect, to be modest enough to be worthy. It all fell away, sliding off me like heavy chains dissolving into smoke. I took my first true breath of freedom. This was the peace that Islam promised but never delivered to me. This was the rest that my soul had been starving for. I didn't have to worry about the scale tipping the wrong way. Jesus had stepped onto the scale for me, and his worth outweighed the universe. I looked at him with tears of sheer gratitude. I am yours, I wept. I don't want to go back to the striving. I don't want the rules anymore, I just want you. I felt settled, I felt permanent. I was ready to spend eternity right here, bathing in this unconditional love. I was ready to forget the earth, forget the pain, forget the life I left behind. I thought this was the end of the story. I thought I had reached the destination. But then the light shifted. The expression on his face changed from welcome to commission. And he spoke the 4 words that broke my heart all over again. You must go back. The statement hit me harder than the bullet had. I froze, staring at him in disbelief. No, I protested immediately, the panic rising in my voice. No, please, I just found you, I finally made it home. Don't send me back there, it's cold, it's dark, it's painful. I don't belong there anymore, I belong to you. I reached out, as if I could grab onto the light and anchor myself. But his hand rested on my shoulder, heavy with authority and love. It is not your time yet, Amira, he said gently but firmly. Your story on earth isn't finished. I am sending you back with a mission. A mission, I cried. I don't want a mission, I want peace. He looked deep into my eyes and his gaze steadied me. Tell them what you have seen, he commanded. Tell them that I am alive. Tell Muslim women that they are precious to me. Tell them their worth is not in their covering, but in my creation of them. Tell them I died for them too, I am not their enemy. Tell the world that the truth has a name, and that name is love. Fear rose up in me like a flood, choking me. They won't believe me, I whispered, trembling. My family, they will reject me, they will hate me. They will call me a traitor, an apostate. In my community, leaving Islam is a death sentence. They might kill me for saying this. He didn't deny it, he didn't offer me false comfort. I know, he said simply. I know exactly what it will cost you. I know the persecution you will face, I know the relationships you will lose. I know the names they will call you. He leaned closer, his face inches from mine. But you will not go alone, I will be with you always. When they reject you, remember that I accepted you. When they hate you, remember that I love you. When you feel alone in your suffering, remember that I suffered alone on the cross. I have walked this path before you, Amira, I will hold your hand. Then he gave me a promise that I would cling to in the dark days ahead. One day you will return here for good. This separation is temporary, eternity is forever. Hold on to that hope. I looked at his face one last time, trying to memorize every detail. I wanted to burn the image of his eyes into my soul. I love you, I whispered, I will tell them. I love you too, he said, now go. The light began to fade, or perhaps I was the one fading. I felt a violent tug at my waist, like a rope snapping taut. I was being yanked backward, away from the warmth, away from the life. No, I screamed, reaching for him. But the pull was irresistible, stronger than gravity, stronger than my will. I was falling backward into the tunnel. Back into the cold, back into the pain. Back to the body that was lying on a dirty floor in a shopping center. The journey back was not peaceful like the journey there. It was violent, it was fast, it was terrifying. I was traveling in reverse, ripped away from the presence of God at the speed of light. The grief of leaving him was worse than the physical pain of dying. It felt like I was being torn in half, my spirit screaming for its home while my duty dragged me down. I saw the tunnel rushing past me, the darkness thickening. And then the collision. I didn't just wake up, I crashed. I slammed back into my physical body with the force of a car wreck. Imagine falling from a 10-story building and hitting the pavement. That is what it felt like to re-enter flesh and bone. One moment I was expansive, limitless, made of light and joy. The next I was trapped in a heavy, broken, suffocating cage. Gravity crushed me instantly, pressing down on every inch of my skin. The pain returned with a vengeance, screaming through my nervous system. My chest was on fire. It felt like someone had shoved a hot coal into my lungs and left it there. I couldn't breathe. There was something shoved down my throat, a hard plastic tube that made me gag. My hands were strapped down, my body was convulsing. I opened my eyes, and the world was a blur of harsh, fluorescent lights. No more golden glory, just the sterile, blinding white of an ambulance. The noise was deafening, sirens wailing, machines beeping frantically, voices shouting. "She's back," someone yelled. "We've got a pulse, we've got a rhythm. Stabilize her, BP is rising." I tried to struggle, to rip the tube out of my throat, but I was too weak. I felt like I was wearing a wet wool suit that was 3 sizes too small. The claustrophobia was unbearable. I was free, I thought, tears leaking from my eyes. Why am I back in this prison? A face appeared above me, a paramedic, sweating and pale. "Stay with us, ma'am, don't fight the tube, you're going to be okay." He looked terrified, as if he had seen a ghost. Maybe he had. They rushed me into the hospital, a chaotic blur of ceiling tiles and swinging doors. They sedated me to operate, plunging me into a black, dreamless chemical sleep. It was nothing like the death sleep, it was just a blank gap in the tape. When I woke up hours or maybe days later, the tube was gone. My throat felt like I had swallowed razor blades. I was in the ICU, wired up to a dozen machines that hummed and clicked. A nurse was checking my IV bag. As soon as my eyes opened, the memory of Jesus flooded my mind. It wasn't a dream, it didn't fade like a dream does when you wake up. It was more real than the bed I was lying on. I tried to speak, my voice a broken croak. "Jesus." The nurse turned around looking confused. "Water, do you want water, honey?" I shook my head, wincing at the pain in my chest. "No," I wheezed. "Jesus, I saw Jesus." She patted my hand with a patronizing smile. "You're confused, sweetie. You've been through a lot of trauma, just rest." She didn't understand. She couldn't hear the desperation in my voice. I wasn't confused. I was the only person in the room who was seeing clearly. I lay back against the pillow, tears streaming down my face. I was alive, but I felt like an alien who had crash-landed on the wrong planet. Recovery was a slow, agonizing torture. Every breath was a battle, every movement was a reminder of the bullet. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the spiritual suffocation. I was holding a supernova inside my chest, and I had to pretend it wasn't there. My family arrived in waves of tears and relief. My mother collapsed by my bedside, burying her face in my hand. "Allah is merciful," she sobbed. "Allah gave you back to us." "Alhamdulillah," my father repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Praise be to God." My siblings, my aunt, my uncles, everyone was chanting the same chorus. "It is a miracle from Allah. Allah saved Amira." I lay there frozen, feeling like a spy in enemy territory. It wasn't Allah, I wanted to scream. It wasn't the distant God of the scale who saved me. It was the God with the scars, it was the God you call a prophet. But I couldn't say it, not yet. I was too weak, too scared, too overwhelmed by their grief and love. So I nodded, I smiled weakly, I let them pray over me in Arabic. I let them recite the Quran over my healing body. It felt like a betrayal every time I stayed silent. "I'm sorry, Jesus," I whispered in my mind. "I'm so sorry. Give me strength, I don't know how to do this." For 3 weeks I lived a double life. I was the miracle girl of our community. The Imam came to visit, telling me that Allah had a special purpose for my life. "You must be more devout now," he told me sternly. "You must dedicate this second life entirely to the service of Islam." The irony tasted like ash in my mouth. I was going to dedicate my life, but not to the religion he thought. When I was finally released from the hospital, the pressure intensified. I went back to my parents' house to recover. My mother would help me wash for prayers, treating me like a porcelain doll. I would stand on my prayer rug, my knees shaking from weakness. I would pin my hijab facing Mecca. My lips would say Allahu Akbar. But my heart was screaming, Jesus is Lord. The cognitive dissonance was tearing me apart. I felt like a fraud, a liar, a hypocrite. I remembered Jesus' words, tell them what you saw. But every time I looked at my father's proud face, the words died in my throat. He was so happy I was alive, how could I destroy him? How could I tell him that his daughter had returned from the dead as a heretic? But fire cannot be kept in a paper bag forever. Eventually, it burns through. The secret was eating me alive, hotter than the bullet ever was. I knew the explosion was coming. I just didn't know it would happen over Friday dinner. The breaking point arrived on a Friday evening, the holiest night of the week. We had just finished the Jumu'ah prayers, and the whole extended family was gathered for dinner. The table was groaning under the weight of lamb, rice, and roasted vegetables. The air was thick with the smell of saffron and the sounds of polite conversation. But to me, the air felt thin, like I was high on a mountain where I couldn't breathe. My father sat at the head of the table, looking like a king holding court. He tapped his glass with a spoon, demanding silence. Tonight, he began, his voice booming with authority, we give thanks again. We thank Allah for returning our daughter to us. He snatched her from the jaws of death to show us his power. He looked at me, his eyes shining with pride and expectation. Amira, this is a sign, you have been marked by God's favor. You must use this second chance to serve him better. You must be a beacon of our faith to the community. No more distractions, total submission, that is the price of this miracle. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a decision I made, it was a dam breaking under pressure. I couldn't swallow another bite of rice, I couldn't swallow another lie. I couldn't let them give credit to the wrong author for my story. It wasn't Allah, I said. My voice was quiet, trembling, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. The clatter of silverware stopped instantly. My father frowned, tilting his head. What did you say? I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. I said it wasn't Allah who saved me. The room went deadly still. My mother put her hand over her mouth. Amira, my father warned, his voice dropping an octave, you are confused. No, I stood up, my legs shaking. I am not confused. I was dead, Baba. I was gone. I saw the other side. And the one who met me, the one who sent me back. I took a deep breath, knowing that the next word would blow my life apart. It was Jesus. The name landed in the center of the room like a grenade. For 3 seconds, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then my father stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. How dare you, he hissed, how dare you speak that name in this house? He is the Son of God, I said, the words pouring out faster now. I saw him, Baba, I saw the holes in his hands. I saw the scars where they nailed him to the cross. The Quran is wrong, he was crucified, he did die, and he died for me. My cousin gasped. My aunt started reciting a prayer of protection against evil spirits. My father's face turned a terrifying shade of purple. You are blaspheming, he roared, slamming his fist on the table. You are sick, the lack of oxygen damaged your brain. This is Shaitan deceiving you, you are hallucinating. It was not a hallucination, I screamed back, tears streaming down my face. It was more real than this table, more real than you. He held me, he loved me, he told me to come back and tell you. Tell us what? My father shouted, walking toward me. To become kafirs, to betray our heritage. You are bringing shame on this family, you are dishonoring us. I am telling you the truth, I pleaded, looking at my mother. Mama, please. He loves you, he wants you to know him. My mother wouldn't look at me, she was weeping into her hands, rocking back and forth. She is lost, she sobbed. My daughter is lost. My father pointed a shaking finger at the door. I will not have an apostate at my table. I will not have a traitor under my roof. You have a choice, Amira. Renounce this madness right now. Say the Shahada, ask Allah for forgiveness, and never speak that name again. Or leave this house and never come back. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. I looked at the faces of the people I had loved my entire life. I saw fear, I saw disgust, I saw anger. And I knew with absolute certainty that I couldn't do it. I couldn't deny him. I couldn't unsee the scars, I couldn't unfeel the love. I looked at my father and whispered, he is worth it. Jesus is worth everything. Then go, my father said, his voice cold as ice, you are dead to us. I walked out of the dining room, past the food I hadn't eaten, past the family I was losing. I walked out the front door into the night. I had no money, I had no plan, I had nothing. Except for the presence of the one who promised he would never leave me. And as I walked into the darkness, strangely, I felt the light walking with me. I lost everything that night. I lost my home, my inheritance, my reputation, and my family. To this day, my father will not speak my name. To my community, I am a cautionary tale, the woman who went mad and joined the infidels. I received messages telling me I deserved to die. I was called a whore, a traitor, a disgrace to the hijab. But let me tell you what I gained. A few weeks later, I stood in a small baptismal pool in a simple church. I wasn't wearing a hijab, my hair was wet and matted. I didn't have my family in the pews to cheer for me. But as I went under the water, I felt the final weight of the scale wash away. I went down as Amira, the slave of a distant god. I came up as Amira, the daughter of the king. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Death and resurrection. I had done it physically on March 15th, and now I was doing it spiritually. I found a new family, a church that welcomed me with open arms. They didn't care about my past, they just loved me. I learned to read the Bible, seeing the prophecies I had missed my whole life. I learned to pray without a script, pouring my heart out to a Father who listens. I learned that my value isn't in my modesty, but in His majesty. It hasn't been easy. I still have nightmares about the shooting. I still cry when I think of my mother's face that last night. But I have never, not for 1 second, regretted my choice. Because you cannot regret trading a candle for the sun. I am sharing this story now because I have a promise to keep. He told me, tell them what you saw. So I am telling you. To my Muslim brothers and sisters watching this. I know you, I was you. I know the sincerity of your prayers, I know the fear in your hearts. I am not your enemy, I am not a traitor. I am just a beggar who found bread, trying to show you where the bakery is. Jesus is not just a prophet, He is the bridge you are trying to build with your good deeds. He is the salvation you are hoping for. He is alive, and He loves you with a love that will shatter your world and put it back together. To the skeptics, the atheists, the ones who think this is just brain chemistry. Ask yourself why a dying brain would hallucinate a theology it was taught to hate. Why would I ruin my life for a hallucination? I saw the truth, and the truth has scars. To everyone listening, death is coming, it is the one appointment you cannot cancel. On that day, your money won't matter, your career won't matter, your good deeds won't matter. Only one thing will matter. Do you know Him? Not asterisk about asterisk Him. Do you asterisk know asterisk Him? He is standing at the door of your heart right now, He is knocking. He doesn't want your rituals, He wants you. My name is Amira. I died on March 15, 2019. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because I had to die to find out what it really means to live. Don't wait until your heart stops to make your choice. Choose Him now. Because He has already chosen you.